Facebook. I'm Natalie Andrews with the Wall Street Journal, and I'm here with former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld, who is the Libertarian vice presidential nominee. Every time we do a Facebook Live, we always get asked about the third party option in the race. And, you know, is there another option? People wondered during the Democratic primary if Bernie Sanders would be a third party, or they wondered a lot in the Republican primary, would Donald Trump step out? That was the rumor or the thoughts months ago. Now we're here at the conventions. But you are the third party nominee, or you will be on all the ballots, all 50 ballots.
Gary Johnson and I will be on all 50 state ballots, plus the District of Columbia. That's right.
So why are you at the Democratic National Convention?
Well, there are about 150,000 news outlets here, and it doesn't do Gary and me any harm to talk to sharp analysts like yourself and say hello to viewers like our viewers here. I happen to be an old friend of Hillary Clinton, so in a way we're helping to mark her historic achievement here. But it's really both of those things. We hadn't really intended to come to either convention. Gary happened to be in the Cleveland area, so he stopped by. Next thing he knew, he had done 70 interviews in 24 hours. I came yesterday and did 40 interviews in 9 hours, and one of them was broadcast out to 400 radio stations. So it's a way of extending your reach.
So your goal is mostly to meet with the media that's concentrated in one space rather than talk to voters?
Well, I'll tell you, we're talking to voters, and in both Cleveland and Philadelphia, a surprising number of people come up to us and say, we're really with you. You know, this is not congressmen and people like that, but just rank and file. In Cleveland, there were a bunch of Gary Johnson T-shirts, and here, of course, there's a lot of Massachusetts people, and so they say hi, and everybody seems to wish us well. You know, it's like we're their pet mascot or something. People don't feel threatened by us. It could be a grave error.
Should they feel threatened by the Johnson-Weld ticket?
We do not have threatening personalities, and we've sort of made it our goal not to engage in the kind of name-calling and insult warfare that's characterized the campaign of Mr. Trump, for example. So maybe that's why they don't feel threatened. But anyway, politically, where we stand is that we have to get in those presidential debates to really stand a chance of winning.
What's really your path to get into the debates? What are you going to need to do?
It's a two-step path. In order to get into the debates, you have to be, historically at least, around 15% in the polls. And the last national polls I've seen, Gary Johnson was polling at 12 and 13% in the polls. So we got another couple of percent to go, and we're about to launch a campaign called 15% by the 15th, meaning August 15th. And if we catch a break or two, we may get there. I'm in charge of most of the fundraising for the campaign, and I've noticed a distinct uptick in the last 2 weeks. So people are, with their wallets at least, taking us more seriously than they used to. And a couple of endorsements wouldn't hurt. You know, one of former President Bush's brothers endorsed us yesterday. Another one, his first cousin, Jonathan Bush, is helping me in the Boston area fundraising. So that's, you know, those are signs that responsible people who are on the Republican side are taking us seriously.
If you don't get into the debates, is it?
I think it's tough. Then you're like a historical third party, you know, rapping on the window pane from the outside. But this year, I would argue there's a national interest in having us in the debates, because we're not just two guys who said, let's run for president and vice president. We're both former two-term governors, myself in Massachusetts, Gary in New Mexico. We served together. We're good friends. We were members of a mutual admiration society when we were governors. We knew each other then. It was back in the 90s. And we both succeeded Democratic governors, and both had big fiscal problems in our states, budget problems.
Yeah.
And we were extremely responsible and succeeded in balancing the budget in short order. And in 92, 93, I was rated the most fiscally conservative governor in the nation. Later in the decade, Gary was, after I'd left office. So we left our states in much better economic and fiscal shape than when we found them. I cut taxes 21 times. Gary cut taxes 14 times. And nobody can argue that we didn't change our states economically for the better. At the same time, we're two of the most liberal, open, welcoming people that you could hope to find. I mean, we think that Donald Trump on immigration is an atrocity. We think that Donald Trump and the Mexican wall, it's just like the Berlin Wall. I mean, it's the worst thing in the 20th century. So we think his foreign policy suggestions are absolutely nuts. I was way out there in the 1990s on gay and lesbian civil rights. I appointed the woman who wrote the court decision holding that gay marriage is constitutionally required. And I'm proud to have, had such a major hand in the marriage equality, which is now the law of the land. Similarly, I was always very active in support of Planned Parenthood, a woman's right to choose, all of those issues as well. Gary is quite keen on removing marijuana from the list of banned substances at the federal level.
Would that help you do well in Colorado, perhaps?
I don't
elsewhere?
know. Not my issue. For my sins, I've never smoked a cigarette of any kind, but I do think that alcohol is probably worse than marijuana. So I'm on board for this. And what that would do would be just to remit the decision to the states. So states that wanted to decriminalize marijuana could do so without fear of interference from the federal government. And a conservative state that didn't want to wouldn't have to. So it wouldn't be a federal issue. So that's a combination of policy.
Kind of where
positions.
you stand.
We're in the middle. That doesn't really describe either the Democratic or the Republican Party. The Republican Party, obviously, it doesn't describe because they're wacko conservatives on the social issues. But the Democratic Party, they're going to have a hard time balancing that budget and being fiscally responsible with all the promises that have been made. Maybe everything isn't free yet, but they're saying a lot of things are going to be free. And there's no such thing. I mean, there's no such thing as government money. There's only taxpayers' money. So they're going to have to raise taxes quite a bit. And I can tell you, having been there, that's going to have a bad effect on employment, which again is going to make it harder for the generation between 20 and 30 years old to get a job.
Well, one thing, I think oftentimes we get the question about the third party from Bernie Sanders supporters who do enjoy a lot of Sanders policies that talk about free college education, things like that. Can you bring that group,
here would be my
Party?
pitch. I know that they like all the freedom and liberty which is associated with us in our ticket. In terms of things being free, I'm not so sure that you can just wave a magic wand and say everything needs to be free. Nobody has to work. I'm a big believer in work, but you can make it easier for kids not to be saddled with debt from a college education. You just create more programs which are cooperations between a university and a company. Like University of Massachusetts at Lowell had this big deal with Raytheon, which is a Massachusetts high-tech employer, and kids would work X hours a week while they were in school at Raytheon, and then come out, have a guaranteed job, and their student loan debt is forgiven. There are other programs where the government is the other party. The government says, we will pay for or forgive your student loan debt if you agree to work X period of time in public service after you get out. So that's a way of attracting bright and highly motivated people to public service, which is, a good thing to do. I mean, I always tell people, yes, join public service, but somebody, just coming out of high school or college now, looking at the venomous rhetoric between the two parties in Washington, might be tempted to stay away. So those are approaches that could solve two problems at once. The student loan debt problem, which is, the cost of a college education. It's the same issue as free college. And it would also address attracting able young people to public service, which I think is an independent good.
So we are getting some questions from Facebook. If you have any questions, post them in the comments below, and we will get to them if we can. But Matt asks, what would a Johnson-Weld foreign policy look like? Tonight we're going to hear a lot about Hillary Clinton. Last night we also heard about Hillary Clinton and foreign policy. Talk to him about
I think we would be slightly less prone to intervention to change regimes in foreign countries than has been the case recently. And certainly Mrs. Clinton, an old friend of mine, both Clintons are, but she's shown an appetite for actions to for regime change, both in Syria and Libya. And Gary and I think that you often have unintended consequences from that, which can be economic, they can also be moral. I think the position, the standing of the United States in the world probably was less good after the Iraq invasion of 2003 than it was before it. So we're not trigger happy, right? We'd be a little bit skeptical about sending boots on the ground to other countries or spilling American blood on foreign soil. Having said that, we know that one thing that makes America great is having the preeminent military in the world, so we think you do have to maintain military superiority as a defensive measure, indeed military supremacy in both air power and naval power. You don't necessarily have to plan for fighting 4 land wars simultaneously around the world to support one cohort or another in a country that's falling apart. I go all around the world a lot on business, and I belong to international associations. And, you know, we are the envy of the world. America is the greatest country in the world, and one reason is that our economy and our society are based on the rule of law, and we really, everybody watches every step we make.
We are getting,
Go ahead.
We are getting a question from Jack. What's your view on free trade? The libertarians have a split view on that issue, or not?
No, we believe that America has an edge in free trade because our workers are the most productive in the world. So we think the United States wins in free trade situations.
We have a lot of no TPP signs.
I know that. Gary and I made a vow to each other to always tell the truth, no matter who the audience is.
That's good.
But this is something I even know something about. And if you have an edge in productivity, you're going to gain more high-wage jobs, and high-wage jobs are good, right? Then you lose low-wage jobs. There will be a trade-off. So people who say we're going to lose some low-wage jobs, they're right. But the answer to that is we're gaining more in high-wage jobs, and high-wage jobs are better. And what we have to do is make sure that the people who lose their jobs aren't left up the creek. And the way to do that is by paying attention and funding retraining and resettlement programs. Let's say the state of Wisconsin lost the cheese industry. You know, it's a hypothetical example. So you would go in and teach people alternate products that they could make and how they could be employed in similar industries, or if they wanted to move to Michigan, you help them with resettlement allowances. And this is particularly poignant, I think, because of the aging of the population as the workforce gets older. You know, in my father's generation, if you were 50 years old and you lost your job, you were out of luck. Nobody would hire you for anything. That's no longer the case because 60 is the new 40, et cetera, et cetera. But we got to make sure we don't go back to those days. So I would consider it our moral obligation to address any negative effects of free trade agreements. But overall, I think they benefit the United States.
I hope we don't lose Wisconsin cheese or beer to any
No, that's why I made a hypothetical
yes,
example.
Yes, hypothetical makes sense. You ran as a Republican governor for 2 terms. Gary Johnson was also a Republican governor. What happened to cause you to change parties?
You know, I had always kind of self-identified as a libertarian. When I was in law school, I read Friedrich Hayek, who's one of the conceptual, intellectual fathers of the libertarian movement. When I was governor in the 90s, I went to the annual meetings of the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian think tank in Washington. I subscribed to Reason Magazine, which is the libertarian magazine. I described myself at the time as a libertarian, much to the horror of the Boston press corps. So it wasn't a big move for me, and I've always been fiscally conservative and socially liberal. Nobody really understood it in the 90s when I was in office, because they thought you're supposed to be all one thing or the other. And the two parties are so calcified and so set in their ways that they still think that you have to be all liberal or all conservative.
And would you say they're even more farther apart now?
Oh yeah. No, they are definitely gone rigid. It's a monopoly those two parties have on our political system until this point. And monopolies are not efficient, and they get more and more rigid. and they have no incentive to really be creative and do new things because they've got a guaranteed rate base or they've got, monopoly pricing power. So I think the stakes are pretty high in letting us in to tell our story and try and, get some fresh air into Washington.
And how, again, recap for us, for people that just joined, like, what is your path? You have to get 15% to get to the debates, but when the Electoral College is mapped, how can you, what do you need?
Let's talk in terms of percent of the national vote, okay? So we're at 13% now. Let's say we get to 15% and the commission says, okay, you're in the debates. That act in itself is going to catapult us to 20% because our current 13% is based in substantial measure on the unappetizing nature of the choice posed by the other two candidates, according to national polling. Okay? It's not because they know us and love us, okay? But we got good records, better than pretty good records. We were both, when you get into it, you'll see highly successful two-term governors. So let's say we're at, 16%. People give us a good look. Our name recognition goes from 30% to 60%. We're going to be at 20% in the polls in a big hurry. At that point, I think we pose a substantial danger to the other two parties because we'd be the fresh new thing, the uncola, and we would have momentum. Because not so long ago, we were at 5%. And, if we go to 20%, that's going to come out of the other two parties, let's say equally. Let's say they're each still at 32%. You give me a situation where I'm 20% with huge momentum, the other two parties are at 32%, and they've been sinking for a month. We're going to win that election in terms of the popular vote.
Interesting.
And then the Electoral College takes care of itself. If you start out just counting states right now, no. It's very hard to, get us more than 8 or 10 states. But not impossible.
So you think you get to the debates, you build momentum, then you assess.
Well, I think you build momentum before you get to the debates even. I think the first debate is in late September. I think it's September 26th.
It would be quite a steep climb.
So during the month of September, we're going to try to get the 15% in the month of August. And that would give us the whole month of September to get to 20%. And, we have a big volunteer army around the country. And fundraising is going well. So the pieces are in place for us to continue that hockey stick climb.
So Brett has a really good question, I think. The Libertarian Party has had a presidential candidate in several races.
Since the 70s, yeah.
Since the 70s. And Gary Johnson was a candidate in 2012. But what is the party doing for down ballot races? Is there more of a focus? Why is the focus generally on the presidential race versus down ballot elections?
Well, no, we're gonna share, and we told the party faithful that in Orlando, and there's great excitement about some Republican lawmakers, state senator in the West, just a couple of days ago, switched from Republican to Libertarian, and hereafter he will run as a Libertarian. There's a very good Libertarian candidate for the Senate, U.S. Senate in Colorado, and others around the country, Virginia. So we're going to be helping them with their races as well. I anticipate joint appearances, that sort of thing.
So as a focus of the party, are you more focused on building the party, on getting members of Congress that are Libertarian that are recognized, getting senators in there, or why have a presidential?
Well, I'm focused on winning the presidential election, and that would be a very good thing for the Libertarians because then they can be appointed to responsible positions in the federal government. We're going to try to hire the best and smartest Democrats we can find. This is if we win, and the best and smartest Republicans we can find. We don't kid ourselves that the administration is going to be constituted 100% out of members of the Libertarian Party. But we're, if they're intelligent, highly motivated Libertarians, they'll be hired as well. So both things are important. The down ballot races are very important for the continued growth of the party. And by the way, party registration is growing by leaps and bounds ever since Gary and I were nominated, because people understand two-term governors, that's a real ticket. That's a ticket that might have a shot. So party registration, which has nothing to do with people who used to be members of the Libertarian Party. It's all new members. That's going through the roof.
Huh. Well, we will certainly be watching the polls for the whole presidential race, including the Libertarian ticket, and hopefully we can check back in. And we will certainly be writing about it on WSJ.com as we write about the presidential race. And you can follow us on Facebook as well. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we will catch you later.
Thanks, everybody.